In 1990, Tony Orlando was making a lot of money and had a star on the Walk of Fame. He also won awards in Las Vegas. Now, though, the truth about what almost killed him is finally coming out. After being sued for $35 million, he stood on a hotel wall and was ready to jump. He didn't want this dark story to be told. Why is that the most shocking part? The last person anyone thought would call him and save his life did. Tony Orlando was born in the middle of New York City on April 3rd, 1944. This is where his story begins. It was Michael Anthony Orlando Cassavetes in real life. Being from the working class, he grew up in Hell's Kitchen, an area known for its rough streets. His father was Greek and his mother was Puerto Rican. They had a lot of culture in their home, but things were hard. It was always hard to get money, and there was a lot of gang action on the streets. Every day taught them how to stay alive. While everything was going on, Orlando's most important duty was to take care of his cerebral palsy sister Rhonda. A lot of the kids around him got into trouble, but he kept his attention on his family. He took care of people at home. Outside, there was music all around him. Doo-wop bands trained in stairwells, and American rock and roll and Latin rhythms mixed. He paid attention to everything. He formed his own band, the Five Gents, when he was 15. He was up for the adventure, but he didn't know where music would take him. Everything changed when I was 16. Don Kirshner, a big name in the music business, heard Orlando sing and liked what he heard. He hired him to sing on demos for other acts. It wasn't exciting, but it put him in the middle of everything. Record companies quickly became interested in him because he had a smooth voice and a natural charm. Halfway to Paradise and Bless You, two hits in 1961, were his big break. Both songs made it to the charts, but Bless You got to number 15 in the US and was the big hit, and getting as high as number 5 in the UK. Orlando became a rising teen star when his music was played on the radio and his fame grew in the business. He was on American Bandstand, which at the time was the most famous music show. His boyish looks and voice made young fans fall in love with him. Soon, he was visiting the UK with well-known artists like Bobby V and Clarence Frogman Henry, playing for. It looked like everything was going to plan. It started to get better, but it started to go away just as fast. Pop music was sounding different by 1963 because of the British invasion. New and interesting music was being made by bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And all of a sudden, Orlando's soft pop songs were out of style. Happy Times Are Here to Stay, his last song to make the charts, didn't do very well. Reaching a high point of 82, his music stopped selling, and he stopped playing before he turned 19. It was hard to face the truth. He later said he felt like the youngest, old, and wise person who had ever lived. People were no longer interested in him, so he had to find a new way to move forward. He had to work to support his family because he got married young. He then went into the business side of music. He did something that most artists wouldn't even think of, following a career that was going downhill. He got a job at CBS Records as a background worker. He had everything he could want in the music business in 1970, except the desire to be a singer. He was a powerful executive at CBS Music when he was 26 years old. He was in charge of the April Blackwood business. He worked with great musicians like James Taylor and Laura Nyro, and he even helped Barry Manilow get a start. He made $200,000 a year, which is more than $1.4 million today. He had spent time singing in the past, but he didn't want to do it again. Things changed after a phone call. His producer friends Hank Medris and Dave Appel had a song called Candida that they wanted to sing, but they couldn't find the right person to do it. It was asked of Orlando to record it. At first, he said no. His job was in business at the time, but they kept pushing, and in the end, he agreed. One thing was that his name couldn't be on the song. It had to come out with a fake group name. It was named Dawn. No one thought Canada would do very well, but when it did, it blew up in July 1970. It sold more than 1 million copies and got to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Tony Orlando was the voice of a big hit song all of a sudden, but there was a catch. He still had his good job at CBS that paid well. It could be disastrous if people learned that he was also a singer in his spare time. The next shock was even worse. Candida was released by Bell Records, and the company needed a follow-up. It took more than one hit. They needed a new song, an album, or a real show to market. Orlando was in pain. He had worked hard to get to the top of his company, and that job was safe. The success of Candida, on the other hand, could not be ignored. He recorded Knock 3 times while still hiding who he was. When it came out in late 1970, it became even more popular than Candida in just a few weeks. The song was at the top of the Billboard charts by January 1971. Now, there was no going back. Orlando had to make a choice at this point. He can stay in his well-paying executive job or become a real star. He quit his job at CBS to become a musician. Tony Orlando knew he was unique, but he also knew he couldn't do it by himself. And it wasn't enough for him to just have a name on a record. He called Joyce Vincent Wilson and Thelma Hopkins at that point. Both of them were great backup singers who had worked with big names. The most important thing about them was that they had energy, chemistry, and a personality that could light up a stage. They changed their names to Tony Orlando and Dawn. When they went on tour in Europe, it was their first real test. A lot of people loved them. It was clear that this wasn't just a studio band. They had something real, but the best part was yet to come. They put out Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree in 1973. It was impossible to guess how big it would get. The song was everywhere, not just well-known. Its story about hope, second chances, and going home touched people. In 8 places, it was the #1 song. It was #1 in the US and UK for 4 weeks. It sold 3 million copies in the US alone in just 3 weeks. After many years, Billboard named it one of the all-time greatest songs. Tony Orlando and Dawn didn't stop after one big hit, when most artists will have been happy. After that, they sang songs like, say, "Has anyone seen my sweet gypsy rose?" and "He Don't Love You Like I Love You." They had 19 hit singles between 1970 and 1975, with 3 #1 songs. Almost everyone liked the way they mixed pop, soul, and rock. Then, in 1974, something strange happened. CBS gave him a variety show to host. It was a big deal. Variety shows were one of the most popular ways to have fun at the time. The Tony Orlando and Dawn show began as a replacement for the Sonny and Cher comedy hour during the summer. It became popular very quickly, but no one knew if it would last. The time was just right. People in America were still dealing with the effects of Watergate and wanted something fun and light. Tony Orlando was a great host because he was relaxed and had a famous smile. He even put a smiley face in the O of his name when he signed cards. There was music, comedy acts, and famous people like Jackie Gleason and Jerry Lewis on the show. Because of it, Tony Orlando and Dawn became even bigger stars. Things began to change in 1976, though. The group's progress slowed down, and Orlando was having personal problems. He chose to step out of the spotlight in 1977. The choice wasn't simple, but it felt like the right one. Their only time at the top was short, but they made a big difference. It turned into more than just a song. People who were waiting for loved ones to come home, or soldiers, used it as a sign of support. Their TV show became a classic of 1970s pop culture, and people still remember their songs after all these years. This shows that sometimes the stars you least expect make the biggest impact. In the mid-1970s, when he was at the top of his game, Tony Orlando had everything, and a lot of friends, but he was having a hard time behind the scenes. It was too much to handle to keep up with the fast-paced world of entertainment. He started using drugs because he wanted to fit in. It started out as a fun way to relax, but it quickly turned into something more. He was hooked for 9 months, from the end of 1976 to the beginning of 1977. Cocaine made everything different. It made him lose faith in himself, his ability to make good decisions, and his personal life. His performances were getting worse. His marriage was falling apart, and he was losing sight of his once clear job goals. He didn't play down what happened when he looked back. "It hurt my job, my ability to make decisions, my marriage, my sense of self-worth, my relationship with my viewers, and I lost my TV show." His music success was also beginning to fade at the same time. His band's fame was going down, and their TV show was being canceled. In 1976, things got worse after taking the drug. It caused him to have mood swings, make bad choices, and become someone he didn't know. Then came 1977, a year that almost broke him. Rayanne Marie, his sister, died when she was only 20 years old. He had always been close to her, even though she was born with cerebral palsy. During their meeting, he told her how much she had inspired him. He went through a lot of bad feelings after losing her. Before he could even deal with that loss, something else terrible happened. Fred Prinz, his best friend, died on January 28th. He was 22 years old. He had felt like Prinz was a younger brother. They were unable to be apart. Orange County was there when Prinz was rushed to the hospital. He stood next to his friend's bed as the doctors put bandages on his head. He held his hand as his family made the very sad choice to turn off his life support. He would never forget it. He lost two terrible things in a short amount of time, and they broke him. It was too much for him to handle the stress, sadness, and weight of everything he had been through. He left the stage in the middle of a show in Massachusetts on July 22nd, 1977. He just stopped singing and left in front of 3,000 friends. It wasn't planned. He wasn't trying to say anything. He could no longer handle it. He later talked about what was going through his mind at the time. It was all I could say, help me. I need to leave the stage to see a doctor. He tried to keep going, but he called off the rest of his tour after only 3 more shows. He knew he needed help. He went to a mental hospital by himself and stayed there for a year. He started treatment after doctors told him he had manic tiredness. It was most important for him to take some time to heal. Fans were shocked. No one had seen him or heard from him since he dropped out of the spotlight. In that hospital, though, he was getting better. He focused on getting better, and his faith helped him slowly find his way back. He was ready to go back by 1978. He began his slow return to public life with a show on NBC. He came back as a single artist the same year with the dance hit Don't Let Go. The song got a number 39 on the Billboard Hot 100, showing that he was still relevant in the music world, which is always changing. Orlando was able to stand out even though disco and punk were popular at the time. He did even better after that. He put out Sweets for My Sweet in 1979, which became famous in the UK. Even though he didn't have as many radio hits, his career took off in a new way. In Las Vegas, Orlando became the main act on the Strip, and every night they played to packed houses. His shows weren't just music. There were many costume changes, fancy sets, and even magic tricks in these full-on shows. He mixed his old hits with new songs, which kept his shows interesting and new. At the same time, Orlando took on a new task when it was asked to host parts of the NBA Labor Day Telethon in New York City. He joined for the first time in 1980. What began as a one-time event turned into a commitment that lasted more than 30 years. Every year, millions of people watched him help raise money for studies in muscular dystrophy. He didn't leave until 2011, when Jerry Lewis was suddenly fired from the Muscular Dystrophy Association. He did this to protest. Orlando's work was more than just music and TV, though. He was brave to go to Broadway and star in Barnum. His part as P.T. Barnum was different from anything else he had done. He did more than just sing. He had to learn how to walk on a wire, do magic tricks, and do circus tricks while he was on stage. Orlando filled in for a short time as a sub and did so for 3 weeks in May. He had a lot of success in Barnum, which led to more chances in the theater. After many years, in 1995, he went back to Broadway in Smokey Joe's Cafe, a musical based on the hits of Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. Orlando's voice sounded great with the show's rock and roll songs from the 1950s and 1960s. The show ran for almost 5 years, which showed that he was popular with people of all ages. Orlando found a new cause outside of show business by helping American veterans. Before his 1973 hit, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree, he was a sign of hope for soldiers who were coming home. But over time, he did something with that link. He did a lot of shows for the USO and even went to military sites and war zones to entertain the troops. During Operation Restore Hope in 1993, he went to Somalia to boost the morale of soldiers who were based there. He didn't just speak out at shows. He worked closely with groups that helped soldiers and used his fame to bring them money and attention. He became a member of the Eisenhower Foundation's board of directors in 2002 and helped raise money for programs for veterans. His work with the National Veterans Foundation may have been the most important thing he did that will last forever. He worked as a spokesperson for more than 10 years and helped raise millions of dollars to help soldiers and their families. Steve Allen and Wayne Newton used to be friends. They're two of the biggest stars in the world. But by the late 1990s, their friendship had turned into a nasty fight that took place in court, the news, and personal attacks. They met in Branson, Missouri, where they both worked in the same theater. A partnership that should have worked out quickly fell apart, resulting in $35 million worth of cases and almost 20 years of silence between them. The trouble started at the talk of the TOWN stage in December 1998. Newton was in charge of the building because his business had the lease. That's when he moved. He locked Orlando out on December 4th and said he was due more than $2 million. Florida said no, but it didn't matter. A man he used to think of as a friend had just thrown him out of his own theater. Orlando didn't give up. He sued Newton for $15 million in April 1999, saying that Newton had secretly recorded him, worked with others to hurt him, and push him out of the place so that it would be called the Wayne Newton Theater. Then, in June, Newton sued Orlando for $20 million, saying that Orlando wasn't paying his fair share of the costs and couldn't bring in the numbers he had promised. Newton said that Orlando's 750-seat theater couldn't even fill half of its seats. Things quickly turned bad. During the lockout, Orlando said Newton was holding his daughter's Christmas present hostage. Newton then said that Orlando was telling lies to the press. For years, the cases went on, turning a business deal into one of the worst feuds in show business. They hadn't talked to each other in almost 20 years. When Orlando went to a movie opening in Las Vegas in 2016, Newton walked up to her and put out his hand. Finally, after all those years, they began to fix what was wrong. But Tony Orlando had to fight more than one war. He had trouble with how people saw his music for most of his time. Even though he had sold millions of records, reviewers didn't think much of him because they called him a bubblegum pop artist, which meant his music was simple, light, and not to be taken seriously. Tony Orlando and Dawn were one of the biggest acts in the 1970s. Many people love songs like Knock 3 Times, Tie a Yellow Ribbon, and Round the Old Oak Tree. Fans loved them, but rock reviewers thought they were just silly pop. The group's clean-cut look and their fun, family-friendly CBS variety show made that idea stronger. The music world was moving quickly at the same time. Rock was getting rougher, louder, and more defiant. Orlando didn't make songs that fit the style. Rolling Stone magazine said that his songs were dull and sugary. He tried to forget about the comments, but it kept coming back to him. It got too hard for him to keep up his image and be taken seriously as an artist at the same time. Everything fell apart in 1977. He had a mental breakdown and later admitted that he had been having problems with cocaine addiction. He wrote in his 2002 autobiography, Halfway to Paradise, that the stress of being famous and having to fight for respect all the time almost broke him. The bubblegum pop title never really went away, even after he got better. He tried to break free by taking on new tasks, such as a 1981 Broadway part in Barnum. They always thought of him as the guy who sang feel-good pop songs, though. Tony Orlando made a choice in 1993 that led to the rest of his career. He opened the Yellow Ribbon Music Theater in Branson, Missouri. It has 2,000 seats and became one of the town's most popular spots very quickly. At its busiest, more than 500,000 people came every year. But for Orlando, this theater wasn't just about music. It was also about helping people, especially those who had served in the military. In Orlando, there was a free Veterans Day return party at the theater every November from 1993 to 2013. Every year, thousands of veterans came to Branson, making the town a place where veterans could get together. It affected more than just the stage. Local stores made a lot of extra money during these events, and Branson became known as one of the best places in the country for veterans to live. To honor all that Tony Orlando had done for the community, the mayor of the town made November 8th, 2022, Tony Orlando Yellow Ribbon Day. Orlando stopped playing live in 2024. He had been on stage in Branson for 31 years, doing more than 9,000 shows and bringing his biggest hits to a whole new generation. But Orlando's story wasn't just about how he did well. He wrote a biography called Halfway to Paradise in 2002 that showed the problems he had been having behind the scenes. Things went really well for him in the 1970s, but success came with a cost. He became hooked on cocaine, and by 1977, things in his life were getting worse and worse. He had a nervous breakdown because of the stress of the music business and his own problems. His worst night, he stood on the edge of a New York hotel room and was ready to jump. The phone then went off. It was his sister. He lived because of that call. It woke him up and made him decide to give up drugs and find strength in his faith. His book also talked about the hard parts of his childhood. His father was from Puerto Rico and his mother was from Greece. Even though their cultures affected him, he often had trouble figuring out who he was. He also talked about one of the worst things he ever did in his career, turning down the chance to record Sugar Sugar, a song that the Archies later made into a huge hit in 1969. The book wasn't afraid to talk about tough things. Orlando talked about how painful it was when he and Dawn an important part of the 1970s music scene, broke up. The group broke up in 1977 because of differences in style and personal issues. He told his side of the story for the first time. What broke my heart the most about the book was how he talked about losing his close friend and comic Freddie Prinze. Orlando was one of the last people to see him alive before he died. The sadness was too much to handle. It made him more sure, though, that success and happiness don't always go together. A lot of people liked Halfway to Paradise. It was a #1 book in the New York Times for 12 weeks and sold more than 500,000 copies. It wasn't just about fame or music. It was about getting a second chance, making things right, and finding hope even when things look the worst. Tony Orlando's life has been full of music, love, and turns he didn't expect. The meeting of rock star Jerry Lee Lewis and Elaine, who would become his first wife, was one of the most interesting parts. Buddy Holly was her boyfriend before she met Tony, which made her a part of music history in her own way. Tony and Elaine got married in 1965 and had a son named John. They were married for almost 20 years before they split up in 1984. After 5 years, Tony got married again. This time, it was with Francine Amormino. They went on a wedding on April 29, 1990, and are still together. They have a child too. Tony had trouble behind the scenes, even though he was very successful. After his group, Dawn, made it to the top of the charts, he had a rough time. Later, he talked about it on the 700 Club. He said that even though he was raised Catholic, he got lost for a while. When he became a Christian again in 1978, everything changed. His work, on the other hand, never stopped. He was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 6385 Hollywood Boulevard in 1990. He won many awards over the years, such as Casino Entertainer of the Year and Best All Around. The Amusement and Music Owners Association of New York also gave him the award for Jukebox Artist of the Year. In addition to music, Tony worked hard to help American soldiers. The Bob Hope Award from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society was given to him in honor of his service to the military and to show business. And in 2014, he was honored again when the NAMPOW's 40th anniversary party at the Richard M. Nixon Presidential Library named him honorary chairman. Life has had its ups and downs, but Tony Orlando's story has always been about more than just music. It takes strength, trust, and a strong desire to give back.